Welcome back. I'm Peter St. Onge. This is a weekly roundup of my daily videos on the economy and freedom, where I cut through the BS and lay out what the gaslighting clowns pulled out of their hats this week and what is coming next. Big changes are coming to the H1-B visa that has swamped America with millions of low-wage programmers. Will Americans who did learn to code actually be able to get jobs? Last week, J.D. Vance blasted companies who lay off Americans, then replace them at half the price with H1Bs. The administration now plans to return the program to its original purpose of bringing in top talent, rather than running coding sweatshops that replace Americans. The background is H1B was introduced in 1990 to bring top talent in engineering, technology, and medicine. The original salary cutoff was $60,000, which in 1990 was about twice the salary of an entry-level programmer. In other words, top talent. The problem is it was never adjusted for inflation, and 60 is now below an entry-level programmer. If it were adjusted for inflation, the minimum H1B today would be $139,000. So what was originally supposed to be best and brightest in the world is now a giant sweatshop. And giant it is. The initial H1B cap was just 65,000 workers a year. That grew to 85. Then they added an unlimited exemption for universities, nonprofits, and government. Meaning given each H1B is a 6-year visa and extendable, not 65,000, it's not 85,000, it's 730,000 H1Bs, which is about 1 in 8 tech jobs. It gets worse because after a few years, H1Bs can be converted into green cards who get to stay permanently. By one estimate, that's another 1.5 to 2 million H1Bs. Toss independents educated with your tax dollars, and we're talking roughly 3 million people on the H1B gravy train, including roughly 1.5 million tech workers, which is about 1/4 of all tech jobs. Now, it's one thing if the workers were all making 139 or 190, that's top talent who build companies and create jobs. But at 60,000, it's a different story. At that level, they are replacing entry-level American tech workers who never got the chance to upskill, build companies, and create jobs. Now, the cleanest fix would be simply adjust for inflation. So instead of 60, it's 139,000. That's what Elon and Vivek were proposing earlier this year, along with an annual fee to ensure H1Bs are only used for top talent. By the way, Trump tried doing this in his first term, but it was blocked and then withdrawn by Biden. So what Trump's trying now is even more aggressive, convert the program into a kind of reverse auction where the highest wages get the slots. So if you're hiring a rock star German AI programmer for $500,000, it's automatic, as it should be. If you're trying to brain drain Bangalore, it is a no. So what's next? Trump wants to keep one of America's key advantages, our ability to attract the best of the best from Europe, Japan, Korea, even China, while ending the millions-deep IT sweatshop. Democrats are trying to lure back men who've abandoned them in droves. Is Michelle Obama the new Jordan Peterson? Recently, California Governor Gavin Newsom issued an executive order addressing the, quote, masculinity crisis, telling state agencies to look into why men are killing themselves so much and, more important, why they're not voting for Democrats. Now, this is funny because men don't have a crisis. It's left-wing policies like California who gave men a crisis. As of Joe Biden's last day in office, real wages for men had been flat since 1979. Manufacturing lost 7 million jobs since 1980, with 80% of layoffs hitting men. One study found 7 in 10 workplace DEI programs specifically target men for elimination. In some counties, over 60% of prime-age men without a degree are out of the labor force. They're not working, they're not going to school, they're not doing anything. In fact, labor force participation by men is the lowest in American history. Men make up 73% of alcohol deaths, 93% of workplace deaths. Men are 4 times more likely to be homeless. Suicide rates for men are the highest since the Great Depression. In fact, they're 4 times higher than women. Suicide rates for veterans, who are 90% men, are 50% higher than the rest of the population. Of course, men get little help or sympathy. Instead, they're under constant assault. 60% of male college students say they are, quote, afraid to speak freely on campus, 1 in 3 young men say society views them as, quote, toxic. One study found 90% of mainstream media articles on masculinity frame it as, quote, problematic. Another study found TV ads portray fathers as competent in just 1 in 10 of ads. 65% of divorces are initiated by women, and men lose custody in 85% thanks to loaded courts. This all becomes a vicious cycle. Fatherless children are up to 20 times more likely to be incarcerated, and 85% of juvenile offenders, who are themselves overwhelmingly male, grew up without a father. Of boys who grow up without a father, their suicide risk doubles. So it's rough, and it's going to take a lot more than an EO. And how do they fix it? Simple: the economy, especially for blue collars, and the culture. One of my favorite episodes of British India, Colonel Charles Napier banned the traditional Indian practice of throwing widows on their husbands' funeral pyres, so-called sati. Local leaders complained that it's their culture, to which Napier responded, quote, burning widows may be your custom, but my nation also has a custom. We hang men who burn women alive. You follow your custom, I shall follow mine. In other words, men have our culture, our customs. Progressive harpies at the New York Times have theirs. Live and let live. The harder part is reversing 5 decades of crushing, exporting, and migrant-swapping men's jobs. Trump is doing his best with taxes, deregulation, and, of course, the big, beautiful tariffs. But refertilizing the Rust Belt with new manufacturing and startups will take trillions of dollars and an end to the green war on manufacturing. Happily, history shows men will put up with a lot so long as there is light at the end of the tunnel. Simply knowing help is coming can start to reverse the tide. As for Newsom, it's good to hear a Democrat finally noticing men. Hopefully it comes to more than a campaign slogan. A word from our sponsor. If you own gold or silver, you know they're a great hedge against financial instability and let you grow your wealth outside the banking system and gain greater control over your finances. Monetary Metals offers you the ability to increase your precious metal ounces every single month. Instead of paying to own metal, with Monetary Metals, you get paid 4% on your gold, paid in more ounces. Now's the time to secure your wealth and build your legacy in an asset that the government cannot inflate away. Join thousands of investors earning interest in physical gold and silver every month with Monetary Metals. Visit monetarymetals.com/Peter to learn more. Now back to our show. With Donald Trump suing universities into oblivion for racial discrimination, are the motherships of the progressive revolution going the way of buggy whips? After cutting billions from elite universities and sending it to trade schools, Donald Trump is now suing UCLA for $1 billion for discrimination, with many more to come. Now, this will barely make a dent in universities' trillion-dollar endowments they skimmed from taxpayers over the past several decades, but the gravy train is ending because voters are waking up. According to a recent Gallup poll, 60% of independents and 80% of Republicans say they do not trust universities. As recently as 2015, most Republicans trusted universities. This shouldn't be surprising. Universities are the source of the crazy, and they've gone loud and proud. DEI, transing kids, global warming, the BLM riots that were amazingly COVID-proof when jogging on an empty beach was murder. In short, most universities now recognize that universities are not neutral seekers of truth. They are progressive factories. Worse than losing voters, universities are losing their core audience, students, and the companies who hire them. Just 27% of college grads work in a field related to their major. Almost half of recent grads work a job that does not require a college degree at all. So 4 years and $100K down the drain. 44% of college grads regret their major, including 2/3 of humanities grads. The average payback time for a degree, how long it takes just to break even, is now 21 years. Almost 1 in 4 degrees actually lose money, so the salary boost did not pay back the loans. These include, of course, liberal arts and humanities, communications and psychology, and education degrees that studies find have zero benefit to teacher quality, in case you wonder why kids can't read. Gets worse. Professor Brian Kaplan has calculated the overwhelming majority of college salary boost comes from the admissions, not the education, as in colleges cherry-pick smart kids who would have been successful whether or not they went to college. The 4 years of education was useless to justify the price tag. Interestingly, SAT scores have twice the correlation with job performance as college GPA, as in you could replace the entire 700 billion university system with SAT tests that cost $68 and take 3 hours. So how did we get here? In short, universities captured the social sorting mechanism and turned it into a profit center. Until the 1970s, most jobs used aptitude tests to find good workers and then train them on the job. The hard-left Burger Court struck this down as racist in 1971, and universities rushed to fill the void. College grads went from 26% of adults in 1970 to 62% today, half of whom apparently regret the degree. Happily, this is now changing. Many companies have stopped requiring degrees, including Google, IBM, and AI darling Palantir. In all, a third of companies have removed degree requirements for at least some jobs. Meanwhile, alternatives to college are growing in the form of certification programs that actually do teach useful skills. These are spreading in blue-collar fields like welding or car repair, especially in tech, where a database or coding bootcamp takes 12 weeks, costs 1/8 of college, and sports 80% higher rates. So what's next? Universities have lost the public, they've lost the students, they've lost the companies. They've become parasites on taxpayers and the economy, enemies of liberty, and are finally getting their trillion-dollar wings clipped. Can government statistics be saved, or are we doomed to bait up numbers from a politicized federal bureaucracy? Last week, Donald Trump nominated Heritage Chief Economist EJ Antoni as Commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS. I know EJ well, and he is a quintessential facts guy. He would give his own mother a speeding ticket. BLS is important because it produces the official numbers on jobs and inflation, which are two of the most important report cards on government policy. As in, those are the numbers that win or lose elections. More important, jobs and inflation are key numbers the Fed uses to set monetary policy. Jobs are weak, the Fed cuts even though it raises inflation. If inflation's high, they hike even though it costs jobs. So if those numbers are fake, we have no idea what's happening in the economy, while the Fed will be making things worse. EJ's nomination was in response to a massive revision at BLS that canceled 1/3 of all job creation this year. It follows years, actually decades, of crap numbers from BLS. To give a flavor, in Biden's last year, 818,000 jobs were revised away, as in they were padding his numbers for the election. A 2023 YouGov survey found just 29% of voters believe government inflation numbers. A Napolitan poll found just 20%. Now, the inflation numbers matter because inflation is subtracted from GDP to give real GDP. Meaning if inflation is counted low, it makes GDP look better than it is, which is exactly what happened in the Biden miracle. Predictably, left-wing media has gone after EJ, suggesting they do recognize the current BLS leadership is on their side. They've gone after his battleship backdrops, which are mostly American ships but include the Bismarck, a common choice among battleship bros. But the biggest they've gone after is his suggestion BLS should stick with more accurate quarterly job numbers until it fixes the broken monthly numbers. He suggested a few ways to fix this, starting with accurately communicating when BLS uses statistics to guess rather than actual data. As for the data, the key here is both jobs and inflation numbers come from surveys. BLS sends questionnaires every month asking companies how many jobs they created. Of course, most companies don't bother responding since they're not paid. So BLS just extrapolates without asking what kind of company is failing to respond. On inflation, it's even worse. BLS literally sends junior staffers shopping 3 times a month and extrapolates, meaning a huge chunk of the consumer price inflation, CPI, is imputed. They guessed it. Contrast to these 1800s methods, Truflation tallies prices across the economy to the day. GasBuddy crowdsources gas prices to the minute. Now, fixing both would be easy. Companies could be paid or get a deduction for providing jobs numbers. The BLS could contract with Walmart or Amazon to get real-time data. Housing could replace today's bizarre lagged owner-equivalent rent with actual numbers on home prices and mortgage rates, both of which are widely available. So what's next? EJ's odds on prediction market Kalshi are currently running 50-50, with Democrats, of course, doing their best to keep BLS in the family. He needs Senate confirmation, which has 53 Republicans, so it will come down to rhinos, which is why the media is going after battleships. If we get an actual numbers guy in the BLS, it would go a long ways to rebuilding Americans' trust in statistics, as well as the Fed's ability to make decisions on actual data instead of bureaucratic hallucinations. A word from our sponsor. One of the best ways to secure your Bitcoin is with a hardware wallet, a physical device that lets you keep your coins offline without internet connection. One of the most trusted names in hardware wallets is CoinKite, maker of the famous block clock. CoinKite devices are made in Canada and they're run by passionate Bitcoiners who've been at this since 2012, back when Bitcoiners were trading in person at swap meets. You can pick up hardware wallets and plenty of other goodies at coinkite.com/ProfSaintAnge. That's CoinKite.com/ProfSaintAnge. Okay, back to our show. The tariff recession is canceled, but with the Fed strangling rates, we are nowhere near the boom Donald Trump wants. So say a pair of heavyweight numbers that dropped last week, GDP and jobs. GDP came in at a very respectable 3% for the second quarter, which is solid boom territory. Meanwhile, private sector jobs hit 140,000 on the month, reversing the previous month's 23,000 job loss. More important, those jobs are coming with very tame inflation despite tariffs, with Trueflation notching inflation at 2% on the nose. Both were closely watched after GDP turned negative in the first quarter. Back then, media wet themselves over the Trump collapse. But at the time I mentioned, the numbers were driven by a huge surge in imports to beat Trump's tariff clock. So the way GDP is counted, imports are negative GDP, which seems odd, but the idea is avoid double counting when the stuff is eventually sold. Still, it makes the GDP numbers very dirty when you get a big surge. And so, as expected, it reversed in Q2. Now, this makes it tricky to know what's actually happening in the economy. You could just average the two, which gives GDP growth of 1.25%, which is very weak. Or you could use personal income, which actually measures earnings. That's humming along, logging a 3% growth rate. For perspective, in Biden's last 3 years, disposable income was running just 0.9% per year. So going by GDP, we're crawling. Going by personal income, Trump tripled growth. Now, beyond GDP, the other big number last week was jobs. Those rebounded to a positive 104,000 on the ADP survey. It was actually better than it looked since government-linked jobs dropped 38,000, while productive jobs actually grew over 140. Of course, the big caveat was the big BLS revision, where government statisticians knocked off fully 1/3 of job creation under Trump. That would put jobs in the worst 8% of reports, which is also close to recession. So for different reasons, we don't exactly know what's happening. Imports are screwing up the GDP numbers. The BLS is screwing up the jobs numbers. So what's next? The easiest way to clear through the smoke is markets, which crowdsource recession odds. Production market Kalshi is currently running just 10% odds of recession this year. That's abnormally low. It's also down from 53% in Biden's dying days. It's also down from 69% in the worst of April's trade war. Still, it's one thing to avoid recession. It's another to get the boom that Donald Trump wants. He's ticking the right boxes, tax cuts, deportations, at least bending the curve on federal spending, compared to Biden, who tried to jack spending by $800 billion in his final budget, which was almost triple what's happening now. Still, the Fed's high interest rates are doing what they're supposed to do, strangling jobs. The BLS revision bumped odds of rate cuts as early as September, but the Fed is still resisting on imaginary tariff inflation, meaning we could keep getting slow growth until Jerome Powell either changes his ways, gets bullied into it, or leaves office next May. Either way, the focus now moves to Q3, the key being, did tariffs end up doing anything to inflation, or do they continue barely showing up in the numbers, even as media and the Fed desperately pray they do? Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and go to petersaintange.com for daily videos and in-depth articles with charts and all the gory details. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.